Thank you for taking the time to watch tonight's Bible study. Since we are still in the Easter season, a season of the church year that begins on Easter Sunday and continues until Pentecost, my theme, as it was last week, continues to be about the resurrection of Jesus. Last week, I focused on the resurrection of Jesus through the eyes of the Apostle Paul, and then concluded with a devotional reflection about how the Easter season is a season of new beginnings. Tonight, I want to primarily go back to the gospel accounts of the resurrection, point out their differences, and discuss possible ways to handle those differences before ending with some devotional reflections. Many of you who often hear my sermons know that I like to point out the different ways the gospel writers tell the story of Jesus. If the gospels have diverse theological themes and points of view about the life, ministry, and death of Jesus, which I believe they do, then it shouldn't come as a surprise to us that the resurrection stories are going to vary a little bit as well. Now, here's a quick review of how each gospel tells the story of the resurrection. And I'm just recapping. I encourage you to go back and look and read for yourselves all of the four different accounts. The earliest gospel was most likely the Gospel of Mark. Very early on the first day of the week, 3 women go to the tomb to anoint the body of Jesus with spices. Upon arrival, the stone that had sealed the tomb had already been rolled away. They go into the tomb. A young man dressed in white, not called an angel, was seated on the right side. He tells them, "Don't be afraid. You're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's been raised. He isn't here. Take a look at where they laid him. Go and tell his disciples, especially Peter, that Jesus is going ahead of you into Galilee and you will see him there." And the women are terrified and they flee the tomb and they don't tell anyone. Now that's how the earliest copies of the Gospel of Mark end. Later, there are some additional endings that made their way into later copies of the Gospel. In Matthew's account, there are only 2 women who go to the tomb early on the first day of the week. There's an angel of the Lord sitting on the stone that had been rolled away. Roman guards are present in Matthew's account, and they are paralyzed with fear. The angels tell the women, "Don't be afraid. I know you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He's been raised from the dead. See the place where they laid him. Go and tell the disciples he's been raised. He's going ahead of you and you'll see him in Galilee." They hurry off to tell the disciples, but on the way, they meet Jesus, who greets them. The women grab his feet and worship him. Jesus tells them not to be afraid and go tell his brothers that he'll meet them in Galilee. In Luke's account, initially, we only get the women who went to the tomb very early on the first day of the week to anoint the body of Jesus. Initially, we're not told how many they were, nor are we told their names. Later on in the passage, Luke gives us 3 names: Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Mary, the mother of James, and a note that there were others. We still don't know the final number. They arrive and they see the stone has been rolled away. They go into the tomb and they discover that the body is not there. Then suddenly 2 men, again, not called angels, in gleaming white clothing stand beside them. The women bow down in fear. The men asked, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? Jesus isn't here. He's been raised." All of what's happened has been told to you by Jesus. Then the women remember Jesus's words and they go and tell the disciples. The disciples don't believe them. But Peter goes to the tomb himself and sees that it's empty, but he's still not sure what to make of it all. Then we get in Luke the account of Jesus walking alongside two disciples as they travel from Jerusalem to Emmaus. And these disciples don't recognize Jesus until later in the day when Jesus breaks bread with them. Those two disciples then return to Jerusalem to tell the others that Jesus has been raised. As they're telling the story, Jesus stands among them and he says, "Peace be with you." They are terrified and they think that they're seeing a ghost. In response, Jesus invites them to look at his scarred hands and feet and invites them to touch him, telling them that a ghost doesn't have flesh and bones like you see I have. And then they give him a piece of fish and he eats it. He then commissions them. They go to Bethany just outside of Jerusalem, and there he ascends into heaven. Everything happens in Luke's account in and around Jerusalem. No one makes it to Galilee. In John's account, it is only Mary Magdalene who goes to the tomb. She sees the stone rolled away. She doesn't go in, but instead turns around and runs to tell Peter and the beloved disciple that they have taken the Lord from the tomb and they don't know where they put him. Peter and the beloved disciples have a foot race to the tomb. The beloved disciple gets there first, but Peter is the first to actually go into the tomb. The beloved disciple believes, while Peter doesn't know, again, what to make of it all. Both Peter and the beloved disciple return home. Mary Magdalene, however, stays. In total grief and in tears, she looks again into the tomb, and this time there are two angels dressed in white seated where the body of Jesus had laid. The angels ask why she's crying. She tells them because they've taken away my Lord and I don't know where they've put him. And as soon as she says this, she turns around and Jesus is there, though she doesn't recognize him. He asks her why she's crying. Mary Magdalene, thinking it's the gardener, repeats her dilemma that someone has taken the Lord. Just tell her where the body's at and she'll go and get it. Then Jesus calls her by her name. And it is at that moment she recognizes it's Jesus. He tells her not to hold on to him because he hadn't ascended to God yet. Go and tell the disciples, Jesus tells her, and Mary Magdalene does just that. And then in John, we also get the account of Jesus coming and standing among the disciples, even though the doors were locked and closed. He breathes on them the Holy Spirit. Then we fast forward a week to get to the encounter of Thomas and John, of Thomas and Jesus. And then Thomas, who wasn't at the first appearance, doubted that he would not believe until he saw the nail marks in Jesus's hand and put his hands in his wounds. In John 21, we get the appearance of Jesus in Galilee with his disciples. After a night of unsuccessful fishing, Jesus appears on the shore. Jesus instructs them from the shore to cast their nets on the right side of the boat, and you'll get a catch. They do exactly what he tells them to do, and the catch was so abundant that they had trouble hauling in the net. Then the beloved disciples realizes it's Jesus, tells Peter. Peter jumps in the water and swims ahead of them and meets Jesus as he prepares them a breakfast. And then we get Jesus's encounter with Peter, where Jesus commissions Peter to feed his sheep. 4 different stories. And certainly there are some common threads in them, and certainly there are some differences. Is it okay to simply hold these stories as they are? I believe so. And neither do I believe the differences weaken the case of the resurrection. Instead, the differences, to me, instead of dismissing the resurrection, I think it only strengthens the authenticity of the early accounts of Jesus's resurrection. Again, that's my opinion. There are many who would disagree with me, and that's fine too. But here's my logic. The Gospels were some of the last books of the New Testament written, and certainly after the letters of Paul had been written. If later Christianity had conspired to make up the resurrection stories, The differences in the gospel accounts probably would have been edited out in order to make the story not as disjointed. I believe we're getting differing details in the gospel accounts because the gospels have differing theological points of view. They are not presenting the story of Jesus as if it was a Nancy Drew story where everything has to be synchronized and a jury needs to be persuaded. And let's not forget that we are getting raw stories that had been handed down, and these raw stories reflect a mixture of excitement and enthusiasm, fear and confusion, belief, doubt, and joy. Everybody is all over the place. And to me, there's nothing wrong with a faith that includes awe and wonder and mystery. Remember, these stories are presented as eyewitness accounts, and we know that eyewitness accounts can vary in details with everybody telling the truth. I also think these differing accounts of the resurrection speak to us in our differing experiences and circumstances of life. There are times when I can really identify with Thomas. And there are other times that I can really identify with one of the Marys. Then there are other times that the reactions and the journey of Peter speak to me. The big takeaway from these differing resurrection accounts is that whatever happened, and in whatever way it happened, the result was a complete turnaround in the lives of those who encountered it. The resurrection of Jesus provided a completely different way to view life. And whatever it was, it changed the lives of those who followed Jesus. And it was the belief in the resurrection that empowered the growth of Christianity. And that leads me to the closing devotional reflection or challenge. No matter how you define it or tell it, what does the resurrection of Jesus mean to you? I'm going to repeat that. What does the resurrection of Jesus mean to you? Why is the resurrection important to you? And how does your resurrection belief affect your life and your worldview? And let me say this, because not everyone is in the same place. As the stories of the resurrection testify, not everyone experienced the resurrection of Jesus in the exact same way. So if you aren't ready to answer those questions I just asked, that's okay as well. I just encourage you to stay on that journey of discovery and know also that you're not alone in that journey. Christ and your church family are with you. And like we say in the United Church of Christ, no matter where you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Questions and all, you're welcome here. I've said it many times, the truth of the resurrection will be shown as we give witness to it in our lives. The story of the resurrection isn't done. The story of the resurrection continues because it continues in us and in our churches. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed.